There is a category of horror that I like to call tenderhearted horror, where the horror is horrifying, where it does disturb like it is intended to, but it does still have recurring and strong themes maintained all throughout it that comfort, that are heartwarming in nature. There's a quote that's often attributed to this one Mexican poet, educator, activist named Cesar A. Cruz about how art should comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. The quote is also attributed to Banksy, and respectfully, I don't know who said that quote, but I know Banksy did not. But I see this quote most strongly emulated in this tender-hearted horror genre, in this category. And I think Mike Flanagan is a really, really great example of it. Have I watched everything Mike Flanagan has put out? No, but I have seen The Haunting of Hill House and The Haunting of Bly Manor and Midnight Mass, and all three of those are most definitely in this category of what I'm talking about. Those three TV shows are so tender-hearted horror. They have these really strong themes of community and how a tight-knit family, whether it's a found one or a blood one, can not only bring great destruction, but also great comfort, great healing, great necessity. All of them have significant plots that revolve around love in its various forms, especially in grief. So many of them have these really powerful messages and depictions of perseverance and hope against all of the odds, even if you know it's going to end terribly regardless. And often with these stories, the endings are bittersweet. Often in tender-hearted horror, I find the endings in general, like, it tends to be bittersweet endings, and it's like the closest one can get to a happy ending. A Fig for All the Devils is another one that I've been thinking about often. This is a novel that I read recently. It tells a story of a young boy who develops a relationship and friendship and bond with the Grim Reaper. This young boy comes from a very tragic life that continues to get worse. And this Grim Reaper knows a thing or two about tragedy of his own, loss of his own, especially in terms of family. And this Grim Reaper is looking for his replacement. So he's a mentor to this young boy and is training him to take over his place, or else he'll be trapped as the Grim Reaper for like another century. And the Reaper in this story manages to be the greatest friend and enemy anyone could ever know. And he is such a complex character on this really gruesome journey these two take on together. That one was a heavy book, and it's still very, very heavy on my mind. But just like the horror genre is so versatile across mediums, across mixtures of genres, it also really, really stands out in some of the most like unlikely places, because one of the most significant additions to this subgenre has to be this one SpongeBob fanfiction that haunts me every single day of my life. It's called The Secret Formula Saga. It is fantastic. It is it is a comic adaptation of that one like general creepy conspiracy theory or whatever about the SpongeBob franchise that talks about how like the secret Krabby Patty formula is a dark result of Mr. Krabs secretly cannibalizing Bikini Bottom. Like the secret formula is crab or like is other fish, which is a theory that like I've seen floating around the internet since forever, since these like edgy emo Tumblr escapades of yore. But this one actually followed through with a plot line with a story in really well illustrated comic format. It's by comic artist Marcus Yu, by the way. And this was so devastating. This was so heavy. It follows Plankton as our lead character, as our main character, and as the savior of Bikini Bottom. He has discovered Mr. Krabs' secret. SpongeBob has gone missing. And it's so horrifying and tense. And the ending genuinely made me want to cry, because we do have to say goodbye to some beloved characters that Plankton couldn't save but tried his very, very best to stay committed to in this tragic journey that was so fucked up. And then still in the general realm of children's media, you have the children's horror side of things, which I think children's horror tends to lean more towards being tender-hearted horror as a standard, so it's not so traumatizing for its target demographic. Like across the board, children's horror media will always have like happy endings, but they also feature these protagonists that are incredibly sympathetic and hopeful and resilient, and almost always also feature a sidekick or a friend or a team of some kind that join forces with them, that assist them on this journey, that play the role of someone they can rely on all throughout, like Paranorman, like Coraline, like Monster House. Oh my god, I used to be so obsessed with Monster House. That movie was so terrifying to me. It was so terrifying, and I got so sad as a child. I kept renting it from Blockbuster. I rented it from Blockbuster all the time. I remember being so sad to the point of feeling nauseous when we get to the background story, the backstory, the explanation, the origin of the house. That was a woman who was set up to fail and treated as subhuman her whole life, who finally found happiness but still was being punished for her existence, and transferred her soul over to this house so that she could still, at the very least, live on with her great love and protect him and be protected by him. It's so, I want to cry right now. What a formative movie for my childhood, Monster House. Stories like The Corpse Bride, even, where you have this beautiful corpse woman who died on her wedding day after being so hopeful and never got the chance to fall in love, and thinks that she's finally found it, but must let go of that great love in order to accept that her life has ended and that she's not going to get everything she wanted, but still enact punishment for the man who took away all of her hopes and dreams, her life. I think The Corpse Bride functions as like one of the scariest examples of like children's horror because the horror is so accessible. It's not one of those things where it's like in Coraline where the villain is this otherworldly monster from like an alternate reality. It's not like Paranorman where they're zombies. It's not like Monster House where it's a ghost that has taken over and become a sentient monster house. The villain of Corpse Bride is a man. A regular man who is a murderer, a greedy murderer. The paranormal elements are just in the main character, or in one of the main characters in Our Bride. And that's so terrifying that this was just like a regular human man that everyone trusted in his community who almost got away with it. Corpse Bride is terrifying because that's real. And I think a lot of children's horror, a lot of children's tender-hearted horror is one of those things where like it's scarier the older you get and the more you think about the circumstances surrounding it, which I think is the case for like a lot of horror. I think things in general get a lot scarier when you're older and can handle more complex themes and think about it more deeply. But children's horror, especially because you have so many of these like memories from your own childhood where it's like these key moments of like, oh no, that was so scary. And then things become much sadder in nature, much more heartfelt in nature. The older you get with it, the more it sits with you over time. I think about that a lot with not a children's movie, but a horror movie. Mama from 2013. That was so weird and scary in concept alone. I didn't even see that movie. I've never actually watched that movie. I'm a really big weenie when it comes to horror in general, especially with more recent horror films, horror, paranormal, supernatural films. I don't do well with jump scares. I don't do well with good CGI and special effects, but I love to watch in-depth analysis videos that break down the plot scene by scene basically, and essentially watch the movie through, I don't know, osmosis. Mama from 2013 is actually very devastating, and that one was a pretty popular, I guess it was popular, I think it was popular. It's been a while since it's been in theaters, since it's been discussed in general, but Mama was pretty popular from my memory of it, and it was this really creepy horror movie about the tragedy that runs through this one family, if we're being honest. It opens up with a family annihilator attempting to murder his 2 children after killing the wife, except that there is paranormal intervention from a ghost or a spirit that is at the scene of where this is all taking place. That's the background for what the events are in the rest of the movie. The uncle to these young girls has been searching for them and finds them feral and alone out in the woods years later, and takes them in as their new legal guardian. But the entity that has been taking care of these young girls is not happy that her children are being taken from her, especially not when we find out that that entity is the way she is because she's had her child taken from her. She was a mentally ill woman who had a baby and wanted to keep that baby and lost that baby and has been searching for that baby. And once again, the ending to Mama, tragic and bittersweet, because essentially for the ending of Mama, everyone is with the people they want to be, I guess. It's not entirely a family broken, but it is filled with so much loss. Maybe that is another recurring element across the board that a lot of these tender-hearted horror stories have in common is how often they have to do with family, the power of family, the importance of family, the devastation brought on when family is broken apart. Because then I'm also thinking about another piece of Tenderhearted Horror that I think is one of those things where it walks the line. I think it's horror, but barely. It's the book Monstrilio. I lean a little bit more towards that being more just like disturbing literary fiction, but also horror is just disturbing speculative fiction, so I don't know. But I think there's a horror novel that's like very light on the horror, which I think is surprising to say because like the setup for the book is it's so much. Monstrilio tells a story of this, well, it begins with this mother whose young son has just died, and she knew that he was going to die soon, that he wasn't going to live a long life. He had some health issues. And so immediately after he dies, she cuts open his chest and cuts off a piece of his lung and then feeds the lung, and then the lung is alive and is growing and grows into be a little creature boy named Monstrilio. And the book takes place across many years and rotates perspective because Monstrilio is this little monster boy, this bloodthirsty monster boy. And this book also, side note, does this like really interesting thing on like its various explorations and perspectives on queerness that I really, really enjoyed. But family is central to the novel Monstrilio, and it's so sad, and all I want to do in this world is give Monstrilio a hug. Walking Practice as well, that's a really bizarre piece of like literary fiction that is so horrifying and grotesque in nature. That one tells the story of this alien that has crash landed onto Earth. It is genderless, it is something that feeds on humans. It's also very sexual in nature and has the ability to shapeshift and take on the appearance of various types of humans. So its way of feeding and remaining alive, stranded with no way of reconnecting with their people, is to go on dating apps and then hook up and then immediately eat their temporary lover. Walking Practice was one of my favorite reads from last year. It manages to be so dark and so gross and so funny and so sad. And of course, in this list of Tenderhearted Horror that I love, it would be blasphemous, I think, to not talk about The Haar. The Haar is a Scottish horror novel by David Sodergren, who does really well, really phenomenally, with really, really nauseating, intensely grotesque body horror. And The Haar is no exception. This tells the story of an elderly woman whose husband was lost at sea and died many years ago. And this evil American company is trying to like buy up and take her land, but she refuses to leave because this is her home. And this company, this billionaire, they're not above taking really like fucked up routes of getting what they want out of the people who live in this teeny tiny town. And so the woman is in grave danger and finds this washed up fleshy sea creature thing on the shores of like a nearby beach and takes it home to try and take care of. And this entity forms a really intense attachment to her. And these two share a really, really beautiful actually bond over how they can really relate to one another on having lost their soulmate. It's so weird. Their dynamic is so weird, but an undeniable love story at the end of the day. And the ways that this creature goes about handling business are so just, so right. I'm rooting for you, King, but oh my god, there are things done to the human body that I want scrubbed from my brain, please and thank you. And I think of all the Tenderhearted Horror things on my list outside of the realm of children's media, I think The Haar actually has the happiest ending I've ever seen in like any really intense horror novel, but really like from the Tenderhearted Horror like category. And last but certainly not least, because if we're gonna talk about Tenderhearted Horror, then absolutely we will be talking about Pan's Labyrinth. Pan's Labyrinth has to be one of the most beautiful, magical, messed up, nightmare-inducing horror films I've ever seen in my life. And once again features one of the most like highly discussed, bittersweet, tragic endings within the past couple decades, I must say. This tells the story of a little girl named Ophelia in 1944 Spain. She's traveling with her pregnant mother to go live with her new stepfather, who is a captain in the Spanish military during this fascist regime. Ophelia, shortly after arriving to this new home of hers, finds an old abandoned labyrinth and meets a faun who tells her that she is the reincarnated princess of this underground kingdom. She must perform these trials in order to prove that it's really her and regain her place on the throne. This movie is so violent, it's so intense, it's rated R, but a lot of parents saw a child and magic and whimsy in the movie, in the like the trailers and in the poster, and just disregarded the rated R label. And I'm positive that there are a bajillion other examples of tenderhearted horror, but if I went searching for all of them, I would never leave this spot talking to you. But all in all, I think my love for this like super niche subgenre, I guess, really comes from how picky I get with horror in general across mediums, across formats. I feel like far too much of the horror genre relies on shock value. And I think that's a really easy way to hit that disturbing mark. I think another great downfall of horror is just like how corny a lot of those stories tend to be. Like I feel like so much of the writing in a lot of different horror movies and a lot of different horror novels comes from like this really obnoxious, egocentric like edgelord. I have a lot of respect for anyone who can pull off tenderhearted horror. Apologies for not really posting on here. I got really busy in February, and then I got really busy in March, and I still am busy, but not as busy. But I do still love my time on here. I've been watching a lot of YouTube videos. I haven't left YouTube. I just have not been posting at all. But yeah, let me know, what are your thoughts about any of the tenderhearted horror category submissions that I talked about in this list? If you have any that you think need to be added to the list that I should watch, that I should read. Thank you for watching. Bye.